Hello, dear friend, and welcome to the amazing Sleep Story Tales. I'm so glad you're here with us tonight. Before we begin the tale of Frodo Baggins' story, I'd love to take just a moment to connect with you wherever you are right now. How was your day today? Was it filled with challenges that left you feeling a bit worn out? Or perhaps it was one of those ordinary days that somehow still managed to drain your energy by the time evening arrived. Whatever kind of day you've had, you're here now, and that's what matters. You've made it to this quiet moment, this space that's just for you. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Are you tucked under your covers in a cozy bedroom? Perhaps with the lights dimmed low and the world outside your window slowly settling into darkness. Or maybe you're on a couch, wrapped in your favorite blanket, finally allowing yourself to unwind after a long day. Some of you might even be listening while traveling in a hotel room far from home, seeking the comfort of a familiar voice and a soothing story to help you drift off in an unfamiliar place. Wherever you are, whatever brought you here tonight, I want you to know that this time is yours. For the next little while, you don't need to think about tomorrow's responsibilities or yesterday's worries. You don't need to be anywhere else or do anything else. You're exactly where you need to be. Take a deep breath with me, if you'd like. Breathe in slowly through your nose. Hold it for just a moment, and then let it out gently through your mouth. Feel your shoulders drop. Feel the tension beginning to melt away from your body. You're safe here, you're comfortable, and you're ready to let go of the day. Breathe easily, relax completely, and let the story begin. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit, and that hobbit's name was Frodo Baggins. But to understand Frodo's story, we must first journey back to a time of peace and contentment in the Shire, that green and pleasant land where hobbits made their homes. Frodo was born in the year 2968 of the Third Age, the son of Drogo Baggins and Primula Brandybuck. His early years were touched by both joy and sorrow, for while he knew the love of his parents, tragedy struck when he was just a young lad of 12. His parents took a boat out on the Brandywine River one evening, and in circumstances that were never fully explained, both drowned in those dark waters. Young Frodo was left an orphan, alone in the world, save for his relatives among the Brandybucks of Buckland. For several years, Frodo lived with his mother's family in Brandy Hall, that great sprawling hobbit hole that housed the numerous Brandybuck clan. He grew up among the sounds of the river and the rustling of the old forest nearby, learning the ways of his mother's folk. Yet there was something different about Frodo even then, a quality that set him apart from other hobbit lads. He had a curiosity about the world beyond the Shire, a love of stories and learning that was uncommon among his kind. Then, in the year 2989, when Frodo was 21 years old, something remarkable happened. His cousin Bilbo Baggins, the famous adventurer who had journeyed to the Lonely Mountain and back, adopted him as his heir. Bilbo had no children of his own, and he had grown fond of young Frodo during family gatherings. He saw in the lad a kindred spirit, someone who might understand the longing for adventure that had once driven Bilbo himself to leave the comforts of Bag End. And so Frodo came to live at Bag End, the most comfortable and respectable hobbit hole in all of Hobbiton. Bag End sat beneath the hill on the north side of the town, its round green door opening onto rooms that burrowed deep into the hillside. There were parlors and bedrooms, cellars and pantries, wardrobes and kitchens, all furnished with the finest hobbit craftsmanship. For Bilbo, though he lived simply, had returned from his adventure with considerable wealth, and Bag End reflected this prosperity. Life at Bag End was pleasant beyond measure. Frodo and Bilbo lived together in companionable harmony to bachelor hobbits who enjoyed good food, good books, and good conversation. Bilbo taught Frodo many things: the elvish tongues of Sindarin and Quenya, the old songs and legends of elder days, and the art of writing poetry and prose. They would sit together in Bilbo's study, surrounded by books and maps, while Bilbo recounted his adventures or worked on the great book he was writing about his journey. The years passed peacefully in this manner. Frodo grew into a respectable young hobbit, though he never quite lost the look of eternal youth that some hobbits possessed. Even as he approached his 30s, then his 40s, he seemed hardly to age, maintaining the bright appearance of someone much younger. The other hobbits remarked upon it sometimes, usually attributing it to Bilbo's influence and the easy life at Bag End. Bilbo himself aged even more slowly, remaining sprightly and sharp-minded well into what should have been his declining years. On his 111th birthday, he threw a magnificent party, the talk of the Shire for years afterward. There were fireworks by Gandalf the Wizard, food and drink in abundance, and gifts for all who attended. But at the end of that splendid evening, Bilbo did something quite unexpected. He vanished, disappearing from the Shire entirely and leaving everything to Frodo. Along with Bag End and all Bilbo's considerable wealth, Frodo inherited something else that night, though he did not immediately know its significance. It was a simple golden ring on a fine chain, left in an envelope on the mantelpiece. Bilbo had possessed this ring for many years, having found it on his long-ago adventure. He had told the story many times of how he had discovered it in the dark tunnels beneath the misty mountains, claiming that Gollum, the strange creature who lived there, had given it to him as a present after losing a riddle game. The ring seemed an innocent enough trinket. It had the curious property of making its wearer invisible, which Bilbo had found useful on several occasions. He had kept it secret for the most part, though he had shown it to Frodo years before. Now it was Frodo's, along with everything else. 17 years passed after Bilbo's departure. 17 years of peace and quiet contentment for Frodo in the Shire. He was now 50 years old, still looking remarkably young and hale. He had settled into the role of Master of Bag End, though he never quite achieved the respectability that Bilbo had once possessed. Frodo was known as a bit odd, like his uncle before him, too fond of wandering in the countryside and consorting with the big folk, and even with elves when they passed through the Shire. But the peace of those years was deceptive, for in the wider world, dark forces were stirring. In the land of Mordor, in the eastern regions far from the Shire, the Dark Lord Sauron had returned to power. He had been defeated once, thousands of years before, by the alliance of elves and men, but he had not been destroyed utterly. Now he had taken shape again in his dark tower of Barad, and he was searching for something, searching with an intensity that sent ripples of fear throughout Middle-earth. He was searching for his ring, for the ring that Bilbo had found. The ring that now rested in Frodo's keeping was no ordinary ring of power. It was the One Ring, the ruling ring, forged by Sauron himself in the fires of Mount Doom in the Second Age. Into this ring, Sauron had poured much of his own power and malice, creating a weapon of terrible potency. With it, he had meant to control all the other rings of power that had been made, and through them to dominate all the free peoples of Middle-earth. The ring had been cut from Sauron's hand at the end of the Second Age by Isildur, heir of Elendil, during the great battle on the slopes of Mount Doom. But Isildur had not destroyed it as he should have. Instead, he had claimed it for his own, and the ring had betrayed him, slipping from his finger as he swam in the Anduin River, leaving him defenseless against orc arrows. For over 2,000 years, the ring had lain in the riverbed until a creature named Deagle had found it while fishing with his friend Smeagol. Smeagol murdered Deagle for the ring and was twisted by its power into the wretched creature Gollum, who possessed it for nearly 500 years until Bilbo stumbled upon it in the dark. And now the ring was with Frodo, and Sauron knew that it had been found. His servants, the 9 ringwraiths called Nazgul, were abroad searching for it, and their search would inevitably lead them to the Shire. Gandalf the wizard knew all this, and on a spring evening he returned to Hobbiton to warn Frodo, the old wizard, who had been Bilbo's friend and had helped arrange his long-ago adventure, now sat in Baggins' study with Frodo and explained the terrible truth about the ring. He told Frodo of its history and its nature, of the corruption it brought to those who possessed it, and of Sauron's desperate need to reclaim it. "You cannot use it," Gandalf said gravely. "The ring has only one master, and he does not share power. If you wear it to make yourself invisible, that is but the least of its powers. The ring is trying to get back to its master. It wants to be found, and Sauron's servants are searching for it even now." Frodo listened in growing horror and disbelief. This simple golden ring that he had carried so carelessly for 17 years was the most dangerous object in all of Middle-earth. "What am I to do?" he asked. "What shall I do with it?" After much discussion, Gandalf determined that the ring must be taken away from the Shire, far from Frodo's home, where its presence would endanger all the hobbits. Frodo must take it to Rivendell, the house of Elrond, where the wise could decide what was to be done. It would be a dangerous journey, for the Nazgul would be searching for the ring, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim it for their master. Frodo accepted this burden with a courage that surprised even himself. He was afraid, terribly afraid, but he could see no alternative. "When ought I to start?" he asked simply. And so began Frodo's great journey, though it started peacefully enough. He decided to make it appear that he was simply moving from Bag End to a new home in Buckland, as if he had tired of Hobbiton and wished for a change. He sold Bag End to the Sackville Bagginses, who had long coveted it, and made preparations for departure. With him went his gardener and loyal friend Samwise Gamgee, called Sam, who had been caught eavesdropping when Gandalf first told Frodo about the ring. Sam was stout-hearted and simple, but his loyalty was absolute, and Gandalf had determined that he should accompany Frodo. Also joining them were Frodo's cousins. Peregrine took Pippin, and Meriadoc Brandybuck called Merry, both young hobbits from good families who saw the journey as a grand adventure. The four hobbits set out on foot in September, walking the familiar paths of the Shire under clear autumn skies. For the first days, it seemed almost like a holiday, a walking trip through pleasant countryside. They passed through Woody End and saw elves there, which gladdened Frodo's heart, for he had always loved the fair folk. The elves gave them counsel and protection, warning them that the Black Riders were searching for something in the Shire. But the peace could not last. As they journeyed east, they became aware that they were being pursued. Black Riders on dark horses were searching for them, questioning farmers and travelers about hobbits. These were the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, ancient kings of men who had been enslaved by Sauron through the 9 rings he had given them. They were neither living nor dead, existing in a twilight realm between, and they could sense the presence of the ring. Several times the hobbits had narrow escapes from these terrible hunters. Once they hid beneath the roots of a tree while a Black Rider snuffed at the air above them, so close that they could smell the reek of him. Another time, Frodo felt an almost overwhelming urge to put on the ring and make himself invisible. But something warned him that this would be the worst thing he could do, for the ring would betray him to the riders. They met new friends along the way. At the inn in the village of Bree, they encountered a strange ranger named Strider, a weather-worn man who claimed to be a friend of Gandalf and offered to guide them to Rivendell. The hobbits were suspicious of him at first, but they had little choice, for the Black Riders had tracked them to Bree and attacked the inn that very night. Strider proved his worth by leading them out into the wilderness, taking paths that the riders could not follow so easily. For many days they traveled through wild country, the Weather Hills and the desolate lands east of Bree. Food grew scarce and the weather turned cold and rainy. The Black Riders continued to pursue them, and the hobbits' small company pushed on as fast as they could. Strider guided them surely, though the way was hard and they were all growing weary. Then, atop the hill called Weathertop, disaster struck. The Black Riders found them in the night, and though Strider and the hobbits fought bravely, the leader of the Nazgul wounded Frodo with a Morgul blade, a cursed weapon that left a sliver of itself in the wound. The shard of the blade worked its way toward Frodo's heart, and he began to fade, to become like the wraiths themselves, visible only in the spirit world where they dwelled. Strider rushed them toward Rivendell with desperate haste, for only the healing arts of the elves could save Frodo now. They were met in the wilderness by the elf lord Glorfindel, who set Frodo on his white horse and sent him racing toward the ford of Bruinen. The Nazgul pursued in force, all 9 of them together, and they nearly caught Frodo at the ford. But Frodo's courage held, and as he crossed the river, Elrond released the waters in a great flood that swept the Ringwraiths away. Frodo reached Rivendell at last, but he collapsed from his wound, nearly lost to the shadow. For many days he lay in a healing sleep while Elrond tended him, drawing out the poison of the blade and binding him back to life. When Frodo finally awoke, he found himself in the house of Elrond, in the last homely house west of the mountains, and there he was reunited with Bilbo, who had been living there peacefully for the past 17 years. Frodo's time in Rivendell was a period of rest and healing. The last homely house was a place of beauty and peace, filled with song and ancient lore. The autumn was deepening toward winter, and Frodo spent his days recovering from his wound, talking with Bilbo, and learning more about the history of the ring. Bilbo had aged in the years since he left the Shire, finally allowing time to catch up with him after partying from the ring. He was now very old, his face lined and his hair white, though his mind remained keen. He had been working on his book, a comprehensive history and record of his adventures, and he was pleased to see Frodo again. Yet, when Frodo showed him the ring, Bilbo's face changed, and a sudden greedy light came into his eyes. He asked to see it, to hold it just once more, and when Frodo hesitated, Bilbo grew angry, his face twisted with desire. It was a brief moment, and Bilbo immediately apologized, ashamed of himself. But it showed Frodo just how powerful the ring's hold could be, even on one as good-hearted as Bilbo. A great council was called, bringing together representatives of all the free peoples of Middle-earth. Elrond presided, the ancient and wise Lord of Rivendell. There came Gloin the dwarf and his son Gimli, bringing news from the Lonely Mountain. There came Legolas, an elf from Mirkwood, with tidings of Gollum's escape from their custody. And there came men from the south, Boromir of Gondor, a great warrior from the city of Minas Tirith, and Strider, who was revealed to be Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the heir of Isildur, and the rightful king of Gondor and Arnor, though he had spent his life in exile as a ranger. At the council, the full story of the ring was laid out. They learned how Gollum had been captured by Aragorn and held by the elves of Mirkwood, how he had been questioned and revealed that he had been tortured by Sauron, forced to reveal that the ring had been found in the Shire by a hobbit named Baggins. They learned that Saruman the White, the head of Gandalf's order and once the wisest of the Istari, had turned traitor and now desired the ring for himself. He had imprisoned Gandalf in his tower at Isengard, though Gandalf had escaped. The council debated long about what should be done with the ring. Some suggested using it as a weapon against Sauron. Boromir particularly advocated for this, believing that in the hands of the strong and noble, the ring might turn the tide of war. But Gandalf and Elrond warned against this path. The ring could not be used for good. Its very nature was corruption. Anyone who tried to wield it would ultimately be consumed by it, becoming a new Dark Lord, perhaps as terrible as Sauron himself. Others suggested hiding the ring or giving it to Tom Bombadil, the strange and powerful being who dwelt in the old forest and seemed immune to the ring's influence. But Elrond explained that hiding would only delay the inevitable. Sauron was growing too strong. Eventually, he would find the ring no matter where it was hidden, and all would be lost. There was only one solution. The ring must be destroyed, and there was only one place where it could be unmade, the only fire hot enough to dissolve the gold in which Sauron had bound his power. The ring must be taken to Mount Doom in the heart of Mordor and cast into the cracks of Doom where it had been forged. It was a task that seemed impossible. Mordor was Sauron's stronghold, surrounded by mountains and guarded by countless orcs and evil creatures. The land itself was a nightmare of ash and shadow. To walk into Mordor seemed like walking to certain death. And yet, it had to be done. In the silence that followed this conclusion, Frodo spoke. "I will take the ring," he said, "though I do not know the way." It was a moment of profound courage, a small hobbit accepting a burden that the great and mighty feared to take. Frodo did not volunteer out of confidence in his ability to succeed. He knew he was the least likely of all present to survive such a journey. But someone had to do it, and the ring was his responsibility. It had come to him, and he felt, perhaps rightly, that it was meant to be his task. Elrond looked at him with compassion and respect. "If I understand aright all that I have heard," he said, "I think that this task is appointed for you, Frodo, and that if you do not find a way, no one will." A fellowship was formed to aid Frodo in his quest. 9 companions were chosen to set out together to stand against the 9 riders of Sauron. There was Gandalf the wizard to lead them, Aragorn and Boromir to represent men, Legolas the elf and Gimli the dwarf, and for hobbits, Frodo the ring-bearer and his companions, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. Sam insisted on going with Frodo, and neither Elrond nor Gandalf had the heart to refuse him. Merry and Pippin likewise would not be parted from their friends. They set out from Rivendell in midwinter, hoping to cross the misty mountains by the pass of Caradhras. But the mountain defeated them, sending down snow and ice in such fury that they had to turn back or perish. Gandalf then led them to an alternative route, the ancient dwarf kingdom of Moria, which delved deep beneath the mountains. Moria had once been the greatest of the dwarven realms, a vast underground city of halls and chambers, mines and workshops, where the dwarves had delved for mithril, the precious silver steel worth more than gold. But Moria had fallen into darkness centuries before. The dwarves had delved too greedily and too deep, and they had awakened something terrible in the roots of the mountain, a Balrog, a demon of the ancient world, a creature of fire and shadow from the First Age. The Fellowship passed through the dark halls of Moria in fear and sorrow. They found evidence of the fate that had befallen the dwarves, skeletons in rusty armor, the tomb of Balin Gloin's kinsman, who had tried to recolonize Moria 30 years before. They were attacked by orcs in the chamber of Mizarbel, and only barely escaped down endless stairways into the depths. Then, as they neared the eastern gate and safety, the Balrog came. It rose before them on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, a thing of flame and darkness, terrible to behold. Gandalf stood alone against it, battling the demon on the narrow bridge. With his staff, he shattered the bridge, and the Balrog fell into the abyss. But as it fell, its whip lashed out and caught Gandalf's ankle, dragging him down as well. "Fly, you fools," he cried, and then he was gone, falling into darkness with his enemy. The Fellowship fled from Moria in grief and shock, stumbling out into the sunlight on the eastern side of the mountains. They had lost their leader, their guide, and their greatest source of wisdom and power. But they could not stop. The quest had to continue. Aragorn took command and led them south to Lothlorien, the Golden Wood where dwelt the Lady Galadriel and the Lord Celeborn, mightiest of the elves remaining in Middle-earth. In Lothlorien, the Fellowship rested and mourned Gandalf. The elves welcomed them and gave them shelter among the Malern trees, those great trees with silver bark and golden leaves. Frodo and his companions climbed up into the tree houses called Telain, where the elves made their homes, and there they stayed for a month while winter passed and spring came to the world outside. Frodo met Galadriel, the Lady of the Wood, who was ancient and powerful beyond the measure of mortals. She showed him her mirror, a basin of water in which one might see visions of things that were, things that are, and things that yet might be. In the mirror, Frodo saw terrible visions of the Shire burning, of his beloved homeland destroyed by war. Galadriel offered him counsel and comfort, but she also tested him. She spoke of the ring and what might be done with it, and Frodo, moved by an impulse he did not fully understand, offered it to her. Galadriel stood for a moment, trembling, as if struggling with some great temptation. She had desired the ring, imagined using it to preserve her realm and make herself a great queen, beautiful and terrible. But she had the wisdom and strength to refuse it. "I pass the test," she said. "I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel." When at last the fellowship departed from Lothlorien, the elves gave them gifts, boats to carry them down the great river, ropes of elvish make, cloaks that shifted color to blend with their surroundings, and waybread called lembas that could sustain a traveler for a whole day's journey with just one small cake. To Frodo, Galadriel gave a special gift, the Phial of Galadriel, a crystal vessel filled with the light of Erendiel's star, to be a light for him in dark places when all other lights failed. The fellowship journeyed down the great river Anduin in their elven boats, 3 boats carrying 3 companions each. For many days they paddled southward, watching the banks on either side for signs of danger. They were traveling through empty lands now, regions where few people dwelt, and the river was wide and swift. As they traveled, the ring grew heavier on Frodo's mind. He could feel its weight increasing, not physically, but as a burden on his thoughts. He was constantly aware of it, hanging around his neck, and he began to distrust his companions. What if they tried to take it from him? What if Boromir, who had spoken at the council of using the ring against Sauron, decided to seize it by force? These were not Frodo's own thoughts, but the ring's influence working on him, trying to create discord within the fellowship. The ring wanted to be found. It wanted to return to its master, and it would use any means to accomplish this. They came at last to a place of decision. At the falls of Rhoros, the river plunged over a great cliff, and the fellowship could go no further by boat. They landed at Parth Galen, a green lawn beside the lake above the falls, and there they had to choose. Would they turn east toward Mordor and the completion of Frodo's quest, or west toward Minas Tirith and the war that was brewing there? The company could not stay together. Boromir believed they should go to Minas Tirith to use the ring in the defense of his city. Others felt loyalty to Frodo and his quest, but were uncertain of the best path. The decision weighed heavily on them all. Frodo asked for time to think, and he wandered away alone. But Boromir followed him, and in his pride and fear for his city, he tried to persuade Frodo to give him the ring. When Frodo refused, Boromir's mind snapped, and he tried to take the ring by force. Frodo had no choice. He slipped the ring onto his finger and vanished, fleeing from his friend who had become, for the moment, an enemy. Invisible, Frodo climbed the hill called Amen Hen and sat upon the seat of seeing at its summit. There, wearing the ring, he became aware of the eye of Sauron, the terrible searching will of the Dark Lord. The eye turned toward him, a vast presence of malice and power, and Frodo felt himself being torn in two. There were other wills at work as well. Gandalf, he felt, urging him to take off the ring, and other presences encouraging him to flee or to come to them. With a great effort, Frodo tore the ring from his finger and became visible again. He had made his decision. The Fellowship was breaking apart, and if he stayed, the ring would corrupt them all. He would go to Mordor alone, sparing his friends the danger and the burden of the ring's influence. But he was not to go entirely alone. Sam, faithful Sam, had guessed what Frodo intended. When Frodo pushed off from the shore in one of the boats, trying to cross the river alone, Sam came running down to the water. Though he could not swim and was terrified of deep water, Sam waded out into the river anyway, determined not to be left behind. Frodo had to turn back to save him from drowning, and once Sam was safely in the boat, there was no sending him away. "Come along, Mr. Frodo," Sam said. "I'm coming too, or neither of us isn't going." And so they went on together, master and servant, friend and friend, into the darkness of the east. Behind them, the Fellowship broke entirely. Boromir, overcome with remorse for his attack on Frodo, tried to defend Merry and Pippin from an orc attack, but he was slain. The two young hobbits were captured and carried away by the orcs. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli found Boromir dying and heard his final words of sorrow and repentance. They sent him over the falls in one of the elven boats, a funeral after the manner of his people, and then they set off in pursuit of the orcs, hoping to rescue Merry and Pippin. The quest had diverged into multiple paths, each fraught with danger. Frodo and Sam were heading east toward Mordor. Merry and Pippin were prisoners, being carried northward by orcs toward Isengard, and Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli were racing across the plains of Rohan in pursuit. The Fellowship was broken, but its members continued to fight in their own ways against the Shadow. Their story became many stories, woven together in the great tapestry of the War of the Ring. But Frodo's story, the story of the Ring-bearer, continued into the darkest places of all. With Sam at his side, he began the long, terrible journey through the Emyn Muil and the Dead Marshes, toward the Black Gate of Mordor and beyond. Yet, our story does not end in darkness. Though there were many perils ahead for Frodo and Sam, though they would suffer greatly before their quest was complete, they would ultimately succeed. The ring would be destroyed, Sauron would be defeated, and after months of toil and danger, the hobbits would return home to the Shire. But the Shire they returned to was not the peaceful land they had left. The ruffians and troublemakers, who had always been kept in check by the vigilance of the hobbits, had grown bold during the war. Led by agents of Saruman, they had taken over the Shire, cutting down trees, building ugly factories, and imposing rules and restrictions on the free hobbits. Frodo and his companions arrived home to find their beloved homeland scarred and suffering. But the hobbits who had traveled to Mordor and back were not the same simple folk who had left. They had fought in battles and endured hardships that most hobbits could not imagine. Merry and Pippin had grown tall for hobbits, having drunk the entrafts of Fangorn Forest. Sam had proven himself a hero many times over. And Frodo, though diminished by his wounds and the burden he had carried, had a quiet strength and authority that commanded respect. Together with the other hobbits of the Shire, They rose up against the ruffians and drove them out. The scouring of the Shire, as it came to be called, was the last battle of the War of the Ring, though it was fought in the gardens and fields of the Shire rather than on the plains of Gondor. When it was over, Sam took charge of the restoration, using the gift that Galadriel had given him, a box containing soil from her garden and the seed of a malern tree. Sam went about replanting and healing the Shire. He married Rosie Cotton, the sweetheart he had loved before leaving on his adventure, and they moved into Bag End with Frodo, who had reclaimed his old home. For a time, things seemed to return to normal. The Shire blossomed as never before. The trees grew tall and strong. Flowers bloomed in profusion, and the crops were abundant. It was as if the land itself was rejoicing in the defeat of the shadow and the return of peace. But Frodo could not fully enjoy this restoration. He had been changed by his experiences, wounded in body and spirit in ways that could not be healed in Middle-earth. The Morgul wound he had received on Weathertop troubled him every year on its anniversary. The burden of bearing the ring had taken a toll on him that went beyond physical injury. And in the end, at the Grey Havens, Frodo boarded a ship with Gandalf and the elves and sailed into the west, to the undying lands where he might find healing and peace at last. It was a bittersweet ending to his story. Frodo had saved the Shire and all of Middle-earth, but he could no longer live in the land he had saved. Yet in departing, he found the peace that had eluded him, sailing into the sunset toward a realm of healing and rest. Sam returned to the Shire alone, but not without hope. He had been given a different gift, the gift of a full and happy life in the land he loved. He became mayor of the Shire, raised a large and loving family with Rosie, and lived to see the Shire prosper as never before. He kept the memory of Frodo alive in his heart, and he told his children stories of the quest and the courage of the small hobbit who had saved the world. And in time, when Sam's life in Middle-earth was complete, when he was old and full of years and his beloved Rosie had passed away, he too sailed into the west, for he had borne the ring briefly when Frodo was captured, and thus he too was counted among the ring-bearers and granted passage to the Blessed Realm. But that is a story for another time. For now, as you drift toward sleep, remember Frodo Baggins, the small hobbit who carried a great burden, who walked through darkness with hope in his heart, and who ultimately found peace in the land beyond the sea. His courage in the face of impossible odds, his faithfulness to his task even when all seemed lost, and his compassion even for those who had wronged him. These are the qualities that made him a hero, not his strength or prowess in battle. May you rest as peacefully as Frodo now rests in the undying lands, far from the troubles of the world, in a place of healing and joy. May your dreams be filled with green hills and golden trees, with the sound of elvish singing and the laughter of friends. Close your eyes now and let the story of the ring-bearer carry you gently into sleep. The journey is over, the burden has been lifted, and peace has come at last. Rest well, dear reader, and may your sleep be deep and dreamless, or filled with the pleasant dreams of the Shire in spring, when the world is green and growing and all is right with the world.